Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with our latest stories. Sophia never imagined her marriage would one day feel like a quiet arrangement rather than a shared life. 11 years with Kumar had given her stability, a well-maintained home, a reliable routine, and the respect of her peers. From the outside, everything appeared perfect. But inside, Sophia had grown used to silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that stretches between two people who no longer see each other. Kumar was a good man, responsible, diligent, always providing. Yet over the years, his affection had faded into tired nods and rushed goodbyes. Their conversations had become mechanical, their laughter forgotten. Sophia didn't blame him, not really. Life had a way of eroding passion, replacing warmth with duty. Still, there were moments she sat in the quiet of their home and wondered if this was all marriage was supposed to be: predictable days, careful politeness, and fading connection. She didn't feel unhappy, but she couldn't call herself fulfilled either. She had traded romance for reliability, intimacy for structure. And while that choice had once felt wise, now it felt like absence. She missed feeling alive, seen, not just as a wife or homemaker, but as a woman who still had unspoken dreams and untapped emotions. It was during this emotional stillness that Patel entered Sophia's life, a quiet, soft-spoken man in his late 20s hired to help manage household tasks. He was courteous, efficient, and remarkably observant. At first, Sophia barely registered his presence beyond routine instructions. But slowly, the details began to matter. He never asked questions, yet he always seemed to know what was needed. If she looked tired, the lights were dimmed earlier. If a door creaked or a drawer jammed, it was fixed before she even noticed. His attentiveness was subtle, but it filled a space she hadn't realized was empty. One evening, as she struggled with a stack of heavy books in the study, Patel stepped in without a word, gently taking them from her arms. "Let me, ma'am," he said, simple, respectful. But it lingered in her mind far longer than she expected. Maybe it was the way he noticed, or the fact that someone had finally seen her weariness without her having to explain it. That small act stirred something in Sophia, not desire, not yet, but a flicker of emotion that had been dormant for too long. In a life where gestures had become transactional, Patel's kindness felt strangely personal. It wasn't about romance or impropriety. It was about being acknowledged. The loneliness she had learned to live with suddenly had a contrast, a quiet presence that reminded her what it felt like to be cared for without condition or expectation. And though she couldn't name it then, it was the beginning of something she could no longer ignore. As the days blended into one another, Sophia found herself looking forward to the simplest of interactions. Moments she once overlooked had started to shimmer with meaning. It was never anything grand. A quiet glance across the hallway. A cup of tea prepared just the way she liked it, waiting on the table before she even asked. Patel never intruded, never overstepped his place, yet he seemed to move through the house as if he could sense the silence inside her. One afternoon, while dusting the shelves near her reading nook, Patel glanced at the photo frames, snapshots from the early days of her marriage with Kumar. "You looked happy then," he said softly, more as an observation than a question. Sophia stared at the photographs for a long moment. They told a story of youth, of a simpler time, her smile wide, Kumar's hand resting gently on hers. "I suppose I was," she replied, her voice barely audible. That simple exchange opened a door. Their conversations grew, each word exchanged like an ember rekindling something Sophia thought had long died out. They spoke about their childhoods, the contrast between his rural village and her urban upbringing, the sacrifices they both made for duty. And slowly, the house that once echoed with a quiet, stifling void now held the weight of unspoken understanding. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but it was deeply human. Patel's presence reminded her of who she used to be before routine and responsibility dulled her spirit. With Kumar working long hours and barely noticing her quiet unraveling, Patel's empathy felt like sunlight after a long winter. Every small kindness became a lifeline. And though she knew the line between connection and temptation was fragile, Sophia couldn't help but lean into the comfort that Patel, unknowingly or not, continued to offer. It was a quiet evening, one of those dusky golden hours when everything seemed to slow down. Sophia sat alone in the garden, her gaze drifting toward the horizon as the sun melted into a haze of orange and violet. The air carried a gentle chill, brushing past her skin like a forgotten memory. And then she heard the faint shuffle of footsteps. She didn't need to turn, She already knew it was Patel. His presence had become so familiar, so intricately woven into the rhythm of her days, that she could sense him even before he spoke. "Do you need anything, ma'am?" he asked, his voice gentle, cautious. Sophia shook her head. "No. Just sit with me," she said, surprising even herself. He hesitated only for a moment before settling on the far edge of the bench opposite her, keeping the respectful distance that had always defined them. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence stretched comfortably between them, rich, unforced, and strangely intimate. For the first time in years, Sophia felt like she wasn't merely occupying space, but sharing it. The loneliness that had once wrapped around her like a second skin felt momentarily lifted. And yet, as comforting as the moment was, it came with a shadow. Sophia was not naive. She knew what it meant to blur emotional boundaries, even without physical transgressions. The air between them pulsed with unspoken words, a connection that neither dared name. This wasn't love, and it wasn't a betrayal in the traditional sense. But it was something. Something that filled the emotional void Kumar no longer noticed. Something that gave her back a part of herself she didn't know she'd lost. And even though nothing was said, they both understood. They were standing on the edge of a line that, once crossed, could never be undone. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling quiet, a silence that wasn't peaceful, but loaded with questions Sophia couldn't bring herself to ask. Each time she crossed paths with Patel, there was a flicker of something unspoken between them, something neither of them acknowledged but both undoubtedly felt. It wasn't overt, it wasn't improper. But it lingered in the air, like the hum of a song you couldn't remember but couldn't stop hearing either. And in the stillness of her home, where Kumar's presence felt more like an echo than a companion, those moments with Patel became the only ones that truly felt alive. Sophia tried to convince herself it was harmless, that a glance, a pause in conversation, a shared silence meant nothing. But deep down, she knew it wasn't about the actions. It was about the intent, the awareness, the quiet anticipation that pulsed every time they were near. She wasn't looking for love, nor was she chasing desire. She was simply aching for connection, for someone to look her in the eye and truly see her. Patel never crossed a line. He was always respectful, always careful. But the way he moved around her, attentive, silent, present, it made her feel like she mattered. Like someone was paying attention to the version of herself she had long tucked away behind duty and routine. It was that realization, that her heart had started leaning, even slightly, toward someone else, that shook her more than any stolen moment ever could. That rainy afternoon changed everything. Sophia had been in the storeroom, arms full, struggling with an old box of winter clothes when it slipped from her grasp and tumbled to the floor with a loud thud. Flustered, she bent to collect the mess, but before she could reach it, Patel was already there. He crouched beside her, silently helping, and in the small space between their movements, their hands brushed. It was brief, barely a second, but it carried an electric charge that startled her more than she cared to admit. She looked up, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met. Neither said a word. He simply continued collecting the scattered contents, calm and composed, but his silence felt different this time, heavier. That night, Sophia lay in bed next to Kumar, who as usual was lost in sleep, untouched by the whirlwind that now stormed in her mind. Her thoughts spiraled, not with fantasies, but with discomfort, confusion over how a single moment had awakened something dormant within her. It wasn't about the touch. It was what it meant. That someone else had noticed her, helped her, stood by her without needing to be asked. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the spark of awareness, or how deeply she'd missed feeling this kind of attention. She kept telling herself it was nothing, but deep inside, Sophia knew she was beginning to drift, emotionally, quietly, toward something she wasn't sure she could name. And once that shift began, it was impossible to ignore. The days that followed moved with a strange heaviness, like a melody just slightly out of tune. Sophia found herself more aware of Patel's presence, of the way he moved quietly through the house, how his footsteps had become a familiar rhythm in her daily life. She tried to act as if nothing had changed, as if that fleeting moment in the storeroom hadn't shifted something inside her. But it had. She could feel it in the way her heart paused when he entered a room, in the way her gaze lingered a beat too long before she caught herself and looked away. One evening, while she stood in the kitchen lost in thought, Patel entered carrying groceries. His voice, steady and polite, broke the silence. "Would you like some tea, ma'am?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Thank you. As he prepared it, Sophia watched him, familiar, yet now somehow different. He wasn't just the house helper anymore. He had become the keeper of 1,000 unnoticed moments, each one quietly etching its place into her heart. When he set the cup in front of her, she surprised herself by asking, "Do you ever think about going back home?" The question hung in the air. Patel looked up, thoughtful. "Sometimes. But there's not much for me there." Sophia nodded slowly. "Sometimes home isn't where you came from. Sometimes it's where you feel seen." She wasn't sure why she said it, or if she meant for him to hear the deeper truth behind her words. But he did. And in that unspoken moment, something fragile and powerful was acknowledged, without either of them daring to name it. That evening, Sophia sat alone in the garden, the twilight casting long shadows across the lawn. The scent of jasmine lingered in the air, and the sky melted into soft hues of lavender and gold. It was her favorite time of day, one she usually spent in silence, absorbing the stillness. But tonight, that silence felt louder, heavier. She heard footsteps approaching and didn't need to turn to know it was Patel. There was something about his quiet presence, reassuring, almost intuitive, that had become oddly comforting. He stopped a few feet away, unsure. "Do you need anything, ma'am?" he asked gently. Sophia didn't answer immediately. She looked at the empty chair across from her, then at the man who had somehow become a constant in her otherwise muted life. "Just sit with me," she said. For a moment, he hesitated, then nodded and took the seat at a respectful distance. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was shared. The kind of silence that spoke volumes, filled with everything they couldn't say. As the sky deepened into dusk, Sophia realized how long it had been since she had felt this kind of presence, this kind of understanding. Not romantic. Not dramatic. Just real. And in that shared stillness, something settled between them, not love, not lust, but something far more dangerous, a quiet bond forged by loneliness and unspoken longing. A line hadn't been crossed, not yet. But it was there, and they both saw it now, illuminated by fading light and unsaid words. One evening, Sophia was sitting in the living room, absently flipping through a magazine she had no interest in reading, when Kumar arrived home earlier than usual. His face was tired, lined with stress, but there was something unfamiliar in his expression, uncertainty perhaps or hesitation. He loosened his tie and sat down beside her, silent for a beat before finally speaking. "I was thinking, maybe we should go away. Just the two of us. Somewhere quiet." The words surprised her. For years, Kumar had buried himself in work, in routine, in responsibility. Spontaneity wasn't in his nature. And yet, here he was, suggesting something that sounded almost like hope. Sophia searched his face, trying to gauge the sincerity behind his offer. "A trip?" she echoed. He nodded. "I know things haven't been right for a while. Maybe this could help." For a moment, her heart twisted, not with joy but guilt. Because in his eyes, she saw a man trying, reaching across the distance he had once ignored. And all she could think about was Patel. About the way she felt seen when he was near, the quiet bond that had been growing like ivy through the cracks of her marriage. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe this could fix them. But part of her wondered if it was already too late, if the damage had been done not with betrayal, but with absence. Still, as Kumar waited for her answer, she nodded slowly. "Maybe we do need that." The night before their trip, Sophia couldn't sleep. Kumar was already asleep beside her, breathing evenly, unaware of the storm that churned inside her. She stared at the ceiling, heart heavy with conflicting emotions. The offer for a getaway had touched something in her. It reminded her of the early days when even silence between them felt comforting, not awkward. But it also brought a wave of guilt. While Kumar had been searching for a way to bridge the gap in their marriage, she had quietly let someone else, Patel, become her emotional refuge. She hadn't crossed any lines, not physically. But in her heart, she knew she had wandered far. At sunrise, she walked into the garden where Patel was tending to the plants. His presence, as always, brought a strange sense of calm and confusion. When he looked up at her, she smiled gently. "I need to talk to you," she said, voice barely above a whisper. His expression didn't change, but he stood still, attentive. "I think we need to keep some space." For both our sakes. For a long moment, they just stood there, the air between them filled with unsaid words. Then, Patel gave a small nod. I understand, ma'am. That evening, Sophia and Kumar packed their bags and left for their trip. It wasn't dramatic.
Der were no final glance, no confession.
Just a quiet ending to something that had never been meant to begin. She wasn't sure where the road ahead would lead, but she knew she had finally chosen to walk it with her husband. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy for emotional distance to creep into long-term relationships without notice. The story of Sophia reminds us that even in stable partnerships, neglecting emotional connection can leave space for unspoken feelings and unmet needs. Rediscover each other, ask questions, and make space for small, meaningful moments. Sometimes, the most powerful way to resist temptation is to water the garden you already have. Relationships thrive not on perfection, but on effort, vulnerability, and the willingness to reconnect before it's too late.